We're now going to talk about different types of campaigns. Specifically, we'll talk about defining persuasion, then marketing campaigns, and risk versus crisis communication campaigns. So first, let's talk about persuasion. What is it? It is, we're going to go with a textbook definition here, a conscious attempt by an individual or group to change the attitudes, beliefs, behaviors of another individual or group through the transmission of some kind of message. So what are the components here? Well, first of all, it's intentional. This is not something that accidentally happens. When we're talking about persuasion in this way, it is a conscious attempt. And what is it you're trying to do? Well, you're trying to influence people. In many ways, if you're doing it right, they actually feel like they're influencing themselves, but you are trying to get them to see things your way or do what you would like. And you do this through transmission of a message. So what is that medium of transmission? Well, it can be interpersonal or through technology or a combination of both. And then we get to the message. Well, the message can be cognitive or emotional. It can involve words, images, sounds, or symbols. So remember that this can be literal, involving particular words and that idea we have of a message, but it can also operate on this symbolic level. One last element of persuasion is that it involves free choice. This is not coerced. If you decide to do something because someone has a gun to your head, you may ironically say it's persuasive, but you weren't really persuaded, you were coerced. An area of persuasion is, of course, the field of marketing. And there are many different kinds of marketing, and marketing itself comprises many different elements. When we're devising a marketing strategy, there can be several elements. A public relations element, research that goes into figuring out what it is that you're trying to market to people, what's the best way to do that, community involvement, development of a product or a message, and then, of course, the media planning. When you have that, then you get into advertising. And advertising, of course, can be in several contexts. So you can have commercial advertising, and that's the one we're really most familiar with when we think of advertising. But it can also be social in nature, social marketing, where you're talking about advertisements of issues involving the public good. And so many of you, this is the area of communication that you currently operate in. When we talk about communication campaigns, there's that traditional marketing and advertising model, but there are also different types, risk and crisis communication, and these are slightly different than other types of persuasive campaigns. And there are also significant differences between them. So risk communication, what we're trying to do is inform people about potential risks. And these risks can be health or environmental. And we could think of risks in a larger scale. World hunger or poverty could be considered to be risk. And risk communication is particularly important in the health arena. Now, what's important about risk communication is that the risk you're talking about is not imminent. You're trying to avert it, but it's not about to land on you. So what you're trying to do is provide people with information about the importance of behaviors that they can adopt in order to minimize risk to themselves or others. Now, this is in contrast to crisis communication, which, as the name suggests, involves a crisis, something that is clearly more imminent. Crisis communication are campaigns designed to deal with these situations. So it can be in the health context, if we're thinking about Ebola or Zika, or maybe a particularly dangerous strain of the flu. what are the behaviors that you need to adapt to protect yourself? Or what do you need to know about this so that you can identify if you have symptoms? It could also be in the category of a natural disaster: hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, wildfires, all of this about getting you the information that you need in order to protect yourself. And in these cases, think about government involved in that kind of crisis communication, getting the message out to people in a way that they can hear it and protect themselves. A subset of this, in some ways, not a natural disaster, but national emergencies. And think here particularly of terrorism. The goal in crisis communication is to get information out to people as soon as possible so that they know how to handle the situation, where to go, what to do. And if you are working in any kind of governmental capacity, where you're involved with outreach to the public, you need to have a crisis communication plan. In fact, most organizations should have this as well. There's also a business context to crisis communication, which is a little different than what we've just discussed. In a business, you can have a crisis, and that's not a crisis necessarily for everyone, but it is a crisis for your brand. If there's a salmonella outbreak from eating a particular brand of peanut butter, there is that health risk, there's that crisis communication that you want to get information out to your customers, but that can also be a crisis for your brand. How do you recover from that? The 2005 oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico was a crisis for BP, as well as the Gulf Coast, as was the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill. That was also a crisis for Exxon. A really useful example of crisis communication in the business context was actually the 1982 Tylenol scandal, when someone tampered with Tylenol packages and laced the capsules with cyanide. It killed 7 people, and it was a real crisis for the Tylenol brand and for Johnson & Johnson, the manufacturer of Tylenol. They needed to respond. So what they did was they recalled all of the capsules, something that up until that point no one had done before. They offered refunds and replacements to all of their customers, and then they redesigned the packaging and the pills themselves. They launched a massive media campaign, a public relations campaign, in order to show that they were listening, they were responding, and they took people's health seriously. This is crisis management, and a great example of it, and really was used as in textbook examples of how to engage in crisis communication. So it's a different model, but good businesses should have a plan of how to deal with crises.